Excellent. And let's see here. Okay. Do we have Beau yet? Almost. Okay, well, we'll just wait for Beau. He'll show up. We'll make a big entrance. So it's funny, we were sitting in the back, and we were all talking about, well, what are we going to talk about? That's a good question, actually. It's we wanted to keep it kind of fresh, and I told them before he came in we'd brainstorm it in the room, so hopefully we will do that. But basically this panel is about the fact that these numbers are 6 months old now, but I don't know if you saw this somewhere, but FX, the research department, did some work, and 6 months ago there was 1,715 shows on television. So, and that's only in prime time, from 8 to 11. So that's not sports, it's not news, it's not daytime, it's not fringe, that's just prime time. And 6 months ago, of that, 352 of those shows were scripted. So that's kind of insanity. And I talked to John Solberg from FX recently, and the numbers went up. I think he said, I think, Noah, he told you a number, and then it went even higher, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were creeping up on 400, I think.
Yeah.
Scripted shows.
400 scripted shows.
Yeah. We're going to need a bigger DVR, right?
We're going to need a bigger, that's it, we're going to need a bigger DVR. And so what that creates is what a lot of TV critics and reporters say, it's just too much TV. We're also in the Renaissance period, and everybody here is making a great show. Hopefully you're all fans of that, but as you can tell, at some point in this Renaissance, we have too many great shows, and you can only watch so much. I think there's some scientific number about what you can watch, and that's not even including, for you guys, people have, say, 6 to 10 shows that or more that they're super loyal to, and they watch every episode. But that's not even counting people who watch John Daly, not John Daly. No one watches John Daly, but
Junior.
He used to be a great golfer, but the Daily Show for Jon Stewart and all the late night shows, that's not even including that. So there's all this glut of really good things that people watch on a regular basis, and then it becomes too much. So what this panel is about, and we'll throw this idea out to these guys kind of randomly, is how do you maintain your audience, even if you're the most loyal audience, and how do you, when you're off the air, so when Orphan Black goes off the air or Fargo goes off the air, what happens to that loyal audience? Well, in the meantime, what happens is a whole bunch of new shows come out, and if we are saying that we're in this Renaissance period, a lot of them are going to be really good, and you're going to like them, and if you like them, what happens is maybe you don't come back to the other show. I was told an anecdote earlier where somebody said, yeah, I can't believe that show's not back yet. It had been off. There he is, Beau Willimon, everybody, come on.
Sorry, I was just hanging out in a room waiting to be told where to go, and then they're like, we need you now. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we were looking for you, but we found you. So House of Cards, and another one, and Beau, what you missed was we were just talking about how there's this overwhelming glut of shows, 400 scripted shows, maybe above now, 400 scripted shows on TV right now in prime time, 8 to 11. So very overwhelming for fans, and the idea is, as I just said, what do you do if you're a serious creator like these guys? What options are available to you to keep a loyal audience when you're off the air? And the anecdote that I was sharing earlier is that somebody did say to me, man, I can't believe that show's not back yet. And I was like, I said, literally that show had been off there for 6 weeks. And I was like, it has to be, like, people get vacations, there's writing to do, there's filming and shooting, and people have lost the concept of what it is between seasons because there's so much stuff. And these are pretty savvy people, and well, it doesn't sound like it, but they were. So it's 6 weeks, you can't make another show. And so it's this instant gratification. So what we're going to do here is talk about what can shows do between seasons. And the idea came up, we talked about this in the green room a little bit, is that the idea came up from an executive at BBC America who said, it's kind of like hot stove league baseball, where we need the TV industry needs something along the lines of sports, where you're talking about your stars and your shows and things off the air, so that they don't lose interest, and you keep it interesting and fresh in their minds. And sports teams do a really good job at that. So with that, I just want to throw it out. Have you guys talked about this, because it's kind of a fresh topic? Have you talked about this amongst yourselves or your staff or your network or your channel about how to keep your show fresh off the air?
The networks talk about it all the time. Yeah.
But did they do anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure from our point of view, the first thing we got to do is figure out how to keep them coming back with story. So, cliffhangers and where do you interrupt a character arc to keep people totally invested in that character, things like that. But then there's the whole internet, the fandoms and maintaining a fandom, and that's a whole other ball of wax that can be quite an ongoing conversation here, I'm sure.
Well, we have this is a really, I think, diverse panel, because we have BBC America, we've got CBS and Netflix, and we've got FX, and so they're all in different entities in their own way. So, Beau, what does Netflix tell you between seasons, like what they're going to do to keep House of Cards sort of in the news?
Well, I don't have anything else to compare it to in terms of my own experience. When we were making season 1, it was a discussion as to whether we would release all on one day, or whether we release traditionally week to week, or maybe variants of that, like release 4, then wait a few months and release 6, and so on. And we decided to go with all on one day. Now, what that creates for us is a situation where, for those people who choose to binge watch as soon as we release, then they have almost a whole year before they're going to see the show again. If you're releasing something week to week and there's 13 episodes, you're only waiting 9 months or 8 months. Still a long period of time. For broadcast shows, if it's 20 plus episodes, it's less time. So we didn't actually, from the creative team standpoint, we didn't put much thought into how are we going to keep them interested. I think, the key is, if we tell a great story in the first season, our hope is that whether it's 9 months from now or a year from now or what have you, that people want to come back. And we kind of take the strategy of just hibernating. Like, we don't try to put ourselves out there consistently over that year. I think because there's so much great television now, actually people have plenty to watch during that year, and then it's sort of like, hey, we're back, and there's some excitement to that. Your withdrawal has passed, you've moved on to watch other shows, but hey, remember how fondly you liked this strain of heroin? It's being sold again. Yeah, and so I know that the Netflix marketing team, they're very active on social media, and they're doing tweets and stuff like that, but we're super secretive about the story. We're not putting teasers or leaking out little tidbits of information or who we're casting or anything like that. I think we sort of say, here's what we've got, you've watched it, and now we're going to go and do our work. You live your life, and when we've got something to show you again, we'll let you know. I think the big change over the last 10 years is that distribution models have, there's a lot more options, and that through social media, the dialogue with the fans is something that's completely different. What's not at all different is it still takes a year to make a season of a TV show, and you'll never get around that. I mean, you can only shoot so many pages a day. You can only write so many pages in a year, and so it's like, how do you navigate this thing that's invariable with all the variables that you have?
Yeah, so it's not 6 weeks, is what you're saying, between seasons.
No.
So, and I want to just hit with everybody, and then we'll come back and try, I wasn't even kidding, they were trying to work it out in the room here, an answer to it, because it is actually a topic that's very new to the industry, and getting more important, because 6 months ago there were 352 scripted series. Now there's like 400, so it's crazy, and they're going up. Mickey, you have Excellent. It's a summer series, which they bill as the event series. Right. So you basically have to wait till every summer. And for network people who are not kind of used to, say, the Netflix model, when you're gone, and you're also historically you're in a season when network people don't want, they do now, and that's why it's changed, but historically networks shut down in May, so you're putting it, now you're in a new vehicle where you're putting on a summer series where people are not conditioned to watch it in the summer.
Yeah, we got really lucky, because when we were going out pitching the show, Under the Dome premiered, right before, I think the week before we went out to start pitching, it premiered, and it was this huge phenomenon, again, for summer TV, and so we really were able to ride the wave off of that. But what happened is, by the time that we premiered, the next summer along with Under the Dome, their second season, so many more people were doing it, and it became a lot more. There were a lot more people doing the big summer series and stuff, and just kind of building on what these guys were talking about. For us, we took a little bit different tactic because it was built as an event series, and we sold it straight to series. So we knew we had 13 episodes, but we didn't know if there was any life for beyond that. We certainly hoped there would be. But as a genre show and a fan of these kind of like mystery thrillers, we really took the tactic as a team to say, we didn't want to leave it open-ended. We felt like we couldn't really leave on a cliffhanger because we just didn't know if there was going to be a chance to come back. And so we thought, let's leave it all on the floor. Let's do it as a big self-contained adventure story, and leave a few breadcrumbs for if we get the chance to come back, we can build a whole new season 2 of it. But we really were kind of going for a big finale and treating it like a big summer blockbuster movie. Over 13 episodes, and and for us, like because of that, like we're on CBS. It's a genre show, and I was really hoping as a big fan of these shows that there would be that kind of like core fan base of it, and a lot of, I think, the CBS audiences, like for a lot of the procedurals and stuff, they tend to be a little older. There wasn't quite the younger demographic for a while, but around 4 episodes in, I was live tweeting the shows. I was sort of following the lead of people like Brian Fuller. I'd watched him and how great he was on Twitter, communicating with the fans and building up the fan base by being open and communicating, even during the shows. And I really wanted to follow that lead myself, or somebody like Damon Lindelof and Carlton Hughes through Lost, and through I was watching Carlton Hughes do it through Bates Motel, and I was on watching the show with them and live tweeting stuff. And so I had the opportunity to do that as the creator. And around episode 4, I started seeing this like fans emerge on Twitter and starting to live tweet the show, and a really interesting core group, and I think that became like kind of what Beau was talking about, like the social media for us became a way to start to really build the conversation throughout the season, and then and that's continued all the way through. I mean, I get questions all the time, when's it coming back, or when's, and we're on around the world, so I was able to track, okay, we're this week we opened in Japan or the United Kingdom, and so I'm always trying to communicate with those fans and keep the word out, because we do disappear,
Right, and we'll come back to that, because that's really the emphasis of this. But I wanted to, because what you were saying about you closed it up in the summer, not knowing if you'd come back because you were an event series. Same thing with you. Where you have Fargo, where you have. And that's the buzzword, as you guys well know now. I mean, no one calls it miniseries anymore. It's limited series or event series or something, right? It's some series, and so Fargo was closed, and but I think that the pressure for for FX, is that they now have to say, okay, we have to sell an entirely new series again. And what are the struggles that you found with that, or the bonuses even?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously there's 2 ways to think about it. One is you chase people down the street yelling, "Watch my show," and the other is you don't, right? The other is you say, we're going to make something great, and then people are going to find it because they like great things, And I think, we're trying to create a world that then takes up space in your brain, and you miss that world when it's gone, and nothing else really fills that void the same way. And then, because we're off the air for not even a year, we're off the air for like 18 months or something like that, because we premiered last April, and we're coming back in September probably. And so you're asking audiences to wait longer, and I guess the fear is that they're going to forget about you, or you to actually create an event, you need to have an event, right? I mean, it can't just be you're telling people it's an event. Like you take the extra time to make the show better, and then you come back, and hopefully people will find you. I mean, I certainly didn't expect people to find us in the first place. It was such a strange thing to do, and so I don't know. I mean, I feel like there is a lot of interaction with fans on the sort of shows that skew younger, and I'm sure the social media presence of the Vampire Diaries is enormous. That's not really what I have so little time to begin with. I just feel like I need to make my show.
Right. So you can't spend it on Twitter. I get that. Yeah.
Well, it's also. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's. There's value to it, certainly, and I do some of it, and I feel like it's a great way to interact directly with people when you have something to say, but I don't believe that everything I have to say I should say out loud,
Right. Well, it's interesting what you said too, because by being off for 18 months, it's almost you're becoming special by being away for so long rather than being on a cycle, and then you are also recreating an entirely new cast, and that's kind of a freshness.
Right,
element.
yeah, so it is a different movie each time under the same brand. And, the thing that I had going for me was a brand that cut through, because the other part of this conversation is, well, how do you get an audience in the first place, right? Not to mention, how do you get them to come back, but how do you launch a show like Orphan Black and build an audience for it, and then once people find it, there's nothing else like it on television, so you can't sort of say, well, this other show came along that does what Orphan Black does. I mean, nothing else does that, right? So, I don't know. I mean, I trust people, because people they'll crawl over broken glass to watch something they love in this day and age, where you sort of like, go take a walk or something. But so people will find the great material, I feel like.
Well, I believe that too. But the genesis of the conversation about this was people in the industry saying, they'll do that until they don't, and we need to have a plan for when they don't, because now we're hitting we're hitting overflow of all these great shows where we're much more likely that they might be distracted, not just by a bright, shiny object, which would be a reality series, but like another great scripted series.
But people aren't necessarily watching shows when they air.
Right.
That's one. So there are people there's someone who's discovering Breaking Bad or The Wire today for the first time.
Right.
And I'm jealous of that person. So there's that. Two is, I think television was defined for half a century where the content was being shoehorned into a form that was based upon, at first, live broadcast with the studio audience. I mean, you pointed a camera and it was going directly to a TV. Later it became taped, but because that was the convention, and you were still slotting things into different times, like an hour long or a half hour long on a given night, so that you could sell advertising. You were creating story that would fit within that, and where you would have cliffhangers for commercial breaks. But I think what you're seeing overall is a trend where the form is now beginning to conform more to the content, which is why you have so much more limited series, because some things maybe only are meant to be 8 hours long. You've already seen an erosion of that, starting with paid cable or subscription cable services, where you had early on episodes of Sopranos. Some might be 48 minutes, some might be 61 minutes, and I think that trend will continue, where you'll cease to think about what constitutes even a season. Like the notion of a season is sort of becoming outdated, because that was based on a sort of cyclical nature of like upfronts and selling advertising and all of that. Now you have year-round release. You could begin to see shows where it's not so much about seasons, but you have 4 hours in 2-hour chunks, followed 6 months later by an hour and a half episode clean, followed by 18 months later, 10 episodes that range from 20 minutes to 90 minutes in length. There's no reason anymore why those things can't be explored. And so I think we're just beginning to see that start to emerge.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And that'll be interesting as creators, you guys as creators, to do that kind of thing. But on this panel, what's interesting is your show is really kind of the outlier, and because it's on Netflix and they don't release their ratings, and maybe they'll tell you, but I'm not. Maybe they don't
tell me. I
Yeah,
have
they
no
don't
idea
even
how many people watch
exactly
the show.
right. So it's but these three guys know, right? Yeah, right. So these three guys know, and in some ways, but I think that there's a lot about from the Netflix model and from House of Cards, which has brand loyalty, that we can add here. But the interesting thing is you three guys you see the ratings, and so if there is an erosion, if someone has found another show, you're going to find out kind of immediately. One of the things that somebody brought up about your show, and it plays a little bit into Extant as well, is the notion that people who like sci-fi shows are they're more loyal, and that they find a reason to make this kind of hot stove league, this year-round talk about a show. They're more likely to do that because it's in their DNA than someone who maybe is just came to Fargo for the first time, and then they're like, okay, well, I loved it, but you know what I mean? So there's like the clone club kind of thing, and and there's this viralness to a lot of genre material that's not present in, say, House of Cards or Fargo. So have you seen elements of Orphan Black's audience stay more loyal through that means?
Definitely. Like, first of all, it was really interesting, like, ratings in general are so different now. The, Orphan Black's on Saturday night, which is like a bit of a wasteland, and BBC America has always said from the beginning, we're not interested in the first night number. We're interested in the +3, which is the number that comes in, that how many people have watched it 3 days later, how many people have watched it 7 days later. And that model is like, or that, the strategy to trust in the audience to watch it during the week has paid off. Right. This is like it doubles by the +3 number, sometimes doubles or almost doubles, which is really, like, that's really interesting, and that speaks to a lot of this about your audience and how people watch TV. And then, I mean, like, Orphan Black is just, Clone Club is its own organic thing. It's just fantastic, and we don't have to curate it. They curate themselves. That need, that you're wanting that quality heroin that you missed. they are fanning it themselves, and they're keeping themselves excited. And I'm sure that the networks love that because it's self-perpetuating. It's which is amazing, and we don't have to do that much. It's terrific to engage and to give back to that and to respond to all of that creativity in Clone Club. All of the, like, if I miss Orphan Black in the middle of winter, I go and read hyper erotic, like fan fiction. It's just like,
wow. Okay.
Yeah, go check it out. I'm serious.
Well, I think on our best days, we're trying to make myths, right? We're trying to create these stories that exist on a larger stage than just an hour of television, and it's getting harder and harder to make something timeless. You look at the AFI, the 100 best movies, and you think about Citizen Kane or about The Godfather. Like, if those were made today, would they still be considered that? Because there's so much material in this glut of material. So sometimes what you need, I think, is less. You need more time between. You need time for that first year to really gel in people's heads, and that's why I don't think you'd want to be off the air for shorter than a year. Do you know what I mean? And I've talked to Michelle Ashford, who does Masters of Sex. I mean, it's a grind, man, to do that thing where it's like you're wrapped and then you get a week off if you're not the showrunner, right? And then you jump back into the next year. I mean, I know the Americans, they wrapped their season and then they stayed and broke, a lot of the next year so that they could go off and write scripts on their vacations. That's the crazy grind of it. And so, I think it's good to say, look, this stuff takes time, and there is so much TV, and you guys have other things going, and Louis C.K. took a year off. It's like, that didn't hurt him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah.
And just contextually to bring up another show to talk about kind of what we mean, you talked about like the AFI list and that. In another panel, we were talking about how Manhattan is a series that's on WGN. And in fact, the guys from Rectify brought this up today off panel. They were like, hey, have you seen that? It's a really great show. And then they were talking about how none of their friends had ever seen it. And it had actually come up at a panel. You were actually at that panel where people were saying, we were all, TV critics were saying, okay, look, here's a show that's on a network that some people don't even know if they get, because a lot of people don't know what they're paying for in their cable bill. So, but it's still, the idea is that somebody made a great show, right?
Right.
A show that could be great. It was certainly very good and very critically acclaimed, and they want people to see it. I mean, that's the idea, right? You guys make stuff, you put your heart and your blood into it, and you want people to see it, and then you can't find anybody who's actually seen it. That's the world that
Right, but if you have a
worries
show
me.
that's on WGN, your expectations for how many people are going to watch it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's great that people are paying you this money to make the show that is your dream to make, and the network should go, well, it's not seen by the same number of people who watch a show on a network that people actually know they have, right? But we're happy, but it's hard. How do you build that recognition? But you find shows like, that come out of, you think are really on the niche or on the fringe, and, they find their way through, you know what I mean? If people are talking about them.
There's also more opportunity now. I think it's less the case for broadcast network where the acts can fall pretty quickly, but still more the case than maybe used to be, that people can find shows, 2 or 3 seasons in, and Breaking Bad is the poster child for that. I mean, it really became a phenomenon just as it was finishing up, because that word of mouth took over, because it became available online, and there's so many different ways to, there are people who love shows that have no idea what network they're on, but they're either DVRing it, or there's some streaming service, something like that. So I think shows can also they can build an audience over time, and so for all we know, 2 years from now, the creators of Manhattan could be sitting up here talking about, wow, what a worldwide phenomenon this has become, and it's amazing. And there's no way to predict that. But there's more avenues now for that sort of build.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people told us this as we were making the show, and I don't know if you guys found this too, but it takes so long to find your footing, and your rhythm, and to really find your show, And people would say this to me all through the first season, like, it's a first season show. You're still finding your footing, and you're finding what works and what doesn't, and which actors you can really lean on, and which one, what stories people are really going to be, and so that all happens when you're making it. We made it all, like our first episode premiered when we were shooting the finale. So it was like, so you kind of hope that you made a lot of right decisions, and for us, the expectations, because of Under the Dome the season before, I feel like everybody had really high hopes and expectations for it, but you're on that tightrope because you're still learning how to make it, and I always look to, I would say, talk about Breaking Bad or talking about like Walking Dead, in the sense of, those shows really found their footing and found their audiences, but it took a little bit of time, and and I think that it's up to the people who are putting them on to have a little faith that that's going to happen.
Right, and in a world where there is Netflix, and I think that contributed, Beau, to a lot of the shows we're talking about getting found out later. And so you have the first season when no one watches, or second season, or and then it goes on Netflix and everybody catches up, and then the third season, boom, you're a thing, right? I mean, you're in the zeitgeist, because people with this influx of shows.
Sometimes even after they're done, I mean, I would bet, I have no numbers to support this, but I bet far more people have watched The Wire since it went off the air than watched it during. I think if there's a list 100 years from now, an AFI list of the greatest 100 shows of all time, it's going to be pretty close to the top. And it was ahead of its time. I mean, TV is largely been an industry that is supposed to be very much of its time, but on rare occasion, with real vision and originality, there are shows that are ahead of their time, and they suffer because of it in terms of ratings. Right. But they now have the opportunity to survive, and they don't disappear. That show's always available to you, forever.
It was interesting with FX, because they, if you watch the show, it says FX presents, because they know that people are going to be watching the show in years to come on different platforms, but they want it to be branded as an FX show. And I think, and John Landgraf, who runs FX, said to me about ratings, he said, I mean, we don't care about same day, and in fact, the reality is we probably won't really know how your show did for a year, Right. And the fact that they have that patience just to look at it all the way down the line, being half the studio on it as well means they get the back end money. So they're looking at not just how to do on TV, but how is it done overall. I think that's really helpful. It gives you a longer shot at making something successful.
Yeah, and as far as like ideas that can help, because it's interesting is that everybody here is a creator, but there is a marketing element to these things. There's press element. There's everything that helps make them, take a greatness and then get it seen. So there's a kind of this marketing element. And when I was talking to, it was Herb over at BBC America, it's like, what can keep them on the air. Would you guys be open and because they're like, how do you? We in the green room we were talking about how the NFL. You have the draft, and now it's 3 days. It's if you're not a sports fan, maybe you don't know, but the NFL draft's 3 days of this all marketing, and people are into it. But because of that, the NFL is on people's brains. Well, I shouldn't say it's on their brains, given the concussion problems. But it's in the news 365 days a year, and so the idea is how do we keep content? And I'm wondering if one of the solutions is. And you guys, I have no idea, so you would tell me if this is possible. Would you be open to something like, especially if you're a continuing show, Beau, like yours, or from Black as well, of shooting extra content during the year while they're there, and then holding that, not using it for the show, and then having that be released, I'm guessing in an online way, to end up feeding people throughout the year and keeping them engaged.
We've talked about things like that, like little webisodes or things like that, but it requires an amazing amount of buy-in from everybody. It requires your cast, and it's time-consuming. Mm-hmm. So. And someone has to write it, and I don't want to. It's that kind of like extra content. It's hard enough to get the content that you want on screen.
But what about more of like an amateur? I don't want to say amateur hour version, but like something that's much more simple, almost like a viral thing, where you have somebody just tape something, stick it on YouTube.
Do you mean coming from the production?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been some discussions about that, but I have to agree, like, you don't want to put anything out there that isn't as good as the show itself, right? Because, and even the marketing discussions that happen, we have in-depth marketing discussions where we want to make sure our key art, that our trailers, that everything we do matches what we're trying to do with the show. And it's hard enough just to make the 13 hours themselves in the course of 1 year, then to say, let's make all of this ancillary stuff. If you view it the way you're describing it, which is just sort of like, here's a little nugget, here's a little nibble, it's going to feel like an appetizer, and we only want to serve a main dish. Mm-hmm. Just to finish my thought, like, I think that you could create a show that's geared towards that, where if you think about, you have to think about that as being content. That's part of the story you're telling. And if you want to make a show where it's like every 4 weeks you're going to get this like 20-minute thing, and then you might get 3 episodes, and then you'll do another thing, so be it. But I don't know if any of the shows up here are geared towards that. And you don't want to put out stuff that, like, you're saying create a viral video. Like, as if there's a formula for creating a viral video, and if anything, when you try to make something viral, you embarrass yourself with how unviral it is. So I think that the best advocate for your show and people maintaining interest is it being good, which sounds like a cop-out, but that's what people are coming back for, is the goodness of it.
Yeah, and I think people are very attuned to what's marketing and what's real, you know what I mean? So if something feels like a gimmick or marketing, it's inherently less interesting. And I think it devalues, the overall brand. I know I've got young kids, and I know when I give them too many presents at Christmas, in the end they're just opening boxes. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not meaningful to them anymore, and I think that can be the case when you try to do too much for an audience, and this idea. I'm still on the fence about the giving every episode at once, just because people will. We're Americans. We will eat both of those hamburgers if you give us the opportunity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, except that, people assume everyone binge watches House of Cards, when in truth only a fraction of people binge watch. But plenty of people also binge watch your show.
Sure, absolutely.
Because that trend of behavior started as soon as there was box sets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I watched the first 3 seasons of Sopranos because I was behind the curve there in a weekend. No, there was no binge watching term. No one was saying this is strange behavior. I was just like, I was unemployed, and it was really good, and I didn't want to stop watching, and because I could, I did. I think what we have to relinquish is any sense of true control over how people experience our show, because now people are binge watching Sopranos from 10 years ago on a phone in a subway, you know, and I'm sure that David Chase didn't intend for this to be only 3 inches wide, you know, but that's the reality.
Yeah. No, and you know, I know that there are people who will literally tape 3 or 4 hours so that they can watch them all together, or, you know, or they'll watch one at a time even though they're all available. You know, you just have to give yourself the time to really take in what the show is trying to tell you. I mean, it works on an entertainment value if you're lucky, but if you're trying to do more with it, you certainly want people to take that time to live with your show in the hours that they're not watching as well. So, you know, and I think that's part of what the off-season is about, is people finding your show and those discussions to continue.
I'll jump in and just say I kind of feel like, and I hope that we go a bit the opposite way, because I feel our show is, you know, it's a sci-fi thriller, and it's a sci-fi world, you know. And as a fan of these kind of things, I love all that expanded universe stuff. You know, I love the graphic novels and the motion comics and the things that explore the lives of other characters that you don't really get the chance to do in, you know, 43 minutes on on CBS, when you know, like when you have the demands of like the act outs, you know, the curtain raisers and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I feel like those other mediums would give you the opportunity to explore those things and those characters in a way. And if you have a fan base that supports it, they love that stuff too. They love going deeper into those worlds, and so I feel like we're a show that could really thrive on it. But we're kind of in the early stages where we're still laying out the foundation for what that world is. And like Graeme was saying, I think a lot of times it's just the allocation of your time and your resources, because it's hard enough to make the show. You know, the people always ask me, like, what's the biggest thing that you've learned, like, after a year, you know, of working, like your dream job in television? And I always say, like, the biggest thing I've learned is it's a miracle that anything is ever great, you know, because there are so like many obstacles to doing it. And so I hope that I get the time and the chance to do more of those things, and would love to do, you know, the web series that's all about some peripheral character that would be really cool in his own adventure, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is difficult. We've just started putting out the Orphan Black comic books, and it does require our attention, because you don't want the story to step on the show. You want the universe
to complement it.
Yeah, you want it to complement it, and you don't want to eat up anything you want to put on your show.
Yeah.
So it gets super difficult to.
Well, you look at somebody like Marvel, you know, like they have the movie universe, and they have the TV universe with Daredevil, and they're starting to, like, you know, there's the, you know, all the weight of that, you know, all the stuff you have to keep track of, and so I can imagine that could be, you know, kind of a problem too, is, you know, tracking your story through those things. But to me, that's a challenge I'd love to have.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing here that you guys are saying, which is certainly a factor, is that don't dilute the product, that's really important. You know, I run the risk of seeming too earnest if I'm like, you do this. But I think it comes from a point of hearing people say, we're worried that this show's going to get canceled. And so in this festival has a canceled too soon segment, right? I mean, we're here for shows that we love, some shows we love that got canceled too soon. So that element is in play. But I totally get that, how you don't want to lose control. And that's another thing you don't want, if you have a comic book, you don't want them to step on your storyboard where you might want to do it. But I'm wondering, and then the viral video thing, what I meant less is trying to create that, because that'll never work. You're totally right about that. But if you have these forces saying, hey, we really want to help you, which could be a wink of saying, you need our help, because if you don't, you know, and I know that that's true of other shows where it's like, hey, you really got to move that needle a little bit, or we can't. And same thing with John Landgraf, a lovely guy, smartest guy in the room all times, and he often says, hey, you know, it was so close. We were so close to renewal on that show, and there's a lot of shows that FX has gone through that were really great and didn't get that needle moved. So I'm wondering, outside of losing control or having extra time, would you guys be open to, like, something that's not even, you know what I mean? It's just not even about the show. Somebody's not even in character. It's not even. It's so clearly different from the show, but involves something of the show, whether it's a writer or some, you know what I mean, or as you say, a fifth character or a smaller character. The guys on Brooklyn Nine-Nine at an earlier panel had brought up, you know, you have Scully and Hitchcock, these two guys in the back who are their own thing, and they've created their own world. They're knitting socks in the back. These are two actors who just get with 1 or 2 lines per show, and there's a thought like, hey, let's do something for these guys in maybe in a not like a webisode where people have to sit down and write it and you've got unions or whatever, but let's let them do something that helps the show. Or would you be open to that, where it's not taking any more of your time and it's not diluting the quality, but someone is saying, hey, we're going to put this out there?
What is this magical thing? You know, doesn't take any time, doesn't dilute.
It sounds
it's
like he's offering to
awesome.
do it.
This is why we're here. This is why we're here, Beau.
I mean, look, this sort of an impossible question to answer. I mean, it depends so much on the show. You know, I mean, I'm a big fan of outside the box thinking in general. Sure, I mean the right story. You know, you could do your sort of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. You know, it's sort of, I guess you're kind of talking almost like a simultaneous spin-off as the show is happening, or I mean, but I think you would kind of, it's for it to be good, you'd almost want to start with that at inception, you know, as a strategy for keeping people to watch the show. And I will sound like a broken record on this. It just has to stay good or get better, because then no amount, if people are losing interest over the course of a year before you release again, it's because the story you told did not embed itself in their gray matter, and you failed on that front from a storytelling perspective. You know, it's not because there's so much other great television out there that they're going to somehow, that smart people in the audience are going to say I'm overloaded and then that show is forced out of my brain and therefore I've lost interest and it's been replaced by the prettier object in the room. They'll, if it really embedded into their mind, then they will come back. You know, so I don't know. I mean, again, I'm speaking from very limited experience. You know, but I don't know if it's like we've got to be shaking in our boots about losing people's interest during that time when we're not like promoting this in some big junket way or some big marketing drive, and the show has just been released. You know, word of mouth is a powerful thing, and the power of story is a powerful thing, and both of those things are way more powerful than any marketing strategy, which is just an attempt to get people to begin to talk, but can't sustain it if the goods aren't there.
Right. Well, one of the things that Orphan Black does, which is in show, which I'm sure you have control over, but the feedback that I get, and you guys probably watch it and we'll have something to say about that as well, is when you have that little where it says a little bit more about Orphan Black, and then the characters talk about what's happening in that episode. So I'm sure you must oversee that, right?
Is that the After the Black specials, or just like?
No, it's actually in the show where there's Tatiana's talking about her character, even just for 2 minutes or a minute.
Yeah, that's.
It seems like extra content.
Yeah, it's, you know, that stuff is sort of shot over the course of the time when we do all the key art and everything, which usually falls near the end of the season. There's usually sort of a week that's, if it's not a hiatus, it's somewhere near Christmas, and we get a lot of extra content during that week when we're doing the key art, and I'm madly trying to catch up. You know, and that's when they'll sit down the actors and we sit down the creators, and everybody talks a little bit, and then that content kind of spins out over the course of the season, and goes on YouTube and things like that.
You know, Justified was based on an Elmore Leonard short story, and Elmore Leonard was nice and went off and wrote a book in between seasons about Raylan, and that's great. And I know, you know, on Castle, it's about a mystery novelist, so they started publishing the guy's books, written probably by some ghostwriter for like 39 cents or whatever. But and then of course the sad state of book publishing, those books are always bestsellers because more people watch the least watched TV show than read the most read book, you know, which is kind of sad. But you know, there are ways, I guess, if they're organic, you know, to the show, or that you can do things that will help to promote it. But I don't necessarily think they're within the same medium that you're working. Do you know what I mean? Like to make webisodes or to make those other things, it sort of feels like what you really want to watch is Game of Thrones. You don't want to watch the behind-the-scenes Game of Thrones extra content, or I don't, you know. But I mean,
but people do actually.
People
That's
do,
seriously.
yeah. And so, you know, I mean, everyone sort of scours the, yeah.
And Mickey raised his hand. Yeah, it's like that's.
Yeah, but you know, those are often made. They're not made by the show. Those are usually made by the marketing department of the, you know. of the network.
Yeah, no, but I think on the idea of extra content that isn't watered down, I did ask people what they would watch, and you might be surprised because usually you wouldn't even watch that. I mean, you guys would watch extra content for Game of Thrones, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So exactly. So there's that thing, and when I was querying people what they want, here's one thing that I got back, which I thought was kind of funny, which was somebody said, "I would love to have like a camera in the writers' room." And they were like, "I would watch that all day long." and I thought, well, that's kind of amazing because
No, you don't.
I'll tell you,
well, you say that, but maybe the fans do, and then you just stick it online, and all of a sudden, hey, that's it, when you're off the air 6 months later, people are still watching it.
There's a great, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a great video from the Breaking Bad writers' room, and it's a time lapse of a couple of weeks of that, and it's fascinating to watch, like, because it was super sped up. But I watched that and found it really interesting, especially like all the candy that people go through like during the day.
Yeah.
I find like it's pretty normal in ours too.
Here's a writer's room. Hey, what'd you guys have for breakfast? What should we have for lunch? What are we eating right now? That's what a writer's
Did you
room
watch
is.
Silicon Valley last night?
Yeah.
Well, since this is about people who want to,
And it's just too profane.
it's too profane. Well, it's on the online. Does nothing.
Well, that's
great.
part of it too. There is like a a sense that I don't bring a lot of visitors in to the writers' room too, because there is a little bit of it being kind of like a sacred space, and you want writers to feel free to pitch their craziest idea or tell their most deeply personal story and that kind of thing. And so it's that would be a hard one, I think, to convince people to pull off, because it would it's the observer effect. What's the cat?
Right, there's that. There's that. Yeah. Well, it's funny because everybody here is a creator, right? And then the person talking about this was an executive, and others have talked about it too. And I was like, well, how do you take a creative show and turn it into like essentially product? And he's like, we need to, and then you guys don't need to. He's saying we need to, and I was like, well, what do you do? And he's like, it's everything from selling T-shirts and hats to doing this online stuff. But I'm guessing that the people who came here today would probably have some ideas or thoughts on it. So we're going to pass a microphone. Do we have a microphone, or is it just people are going to stand up? So just stand up. We're in a small room. So if you have go ahead and stand up and tell us.
The question I had was kind of based on that whole thing about the extra marketing or whatever. What I find interesting is when actors themselves will do little bits. Like I was particularly thinking about, I can't remember what award show it was. Maybe it was the Oscars with Kevin Spacey, where he went straight into Frank Underwood for like 2 seconds and basically had the whole room. People were cheering. I think it was after season 1, so I think that's what it was. But how do you guys just overall feel, or like another example is like the Game of Thrones where, and it might be a generational thing because the young actors actually hang out and they'll do all these weird things, like they shot this video, they're singing this song, but they weren't in character, but they're just actors that having like kind of the persona of their character.
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys feel like if your actors take upon themselves to do little viral videos, or like, hey, I'm getting dressed up as character while I'm shooting? Do you guys have any type of limitations with that? Obviously, other than giving like spoilers or anything. Or do you encourage that, or you just don't care, or?
No, it's it has to go through all the same layers of approval process as any other piece of the story. So sometimes it feels like it's not worth it, but other times, it's hard to make it feel off the cuff, which is what you're liking about it, right? But I personally like that kind of stuff. I like a day in the life kind of stuff where you're backstage, you're back with the actor. I think we had a little bit of that, or we've talked about doing that. You talk about a lot of these things that, in the rush of actually making the show, they kind of fall by the wayside to some more traditional type things.
And I think for the actors it's tough sometimes too, and for us because we're in the writers' room and we're you're dealing with the demands of production. But the actors they're on 12, 14-hour days, and so like. To come from our side and to ask them to do this, this extra stuff, and then there are things to deal with the unions and all that kind of stuff to go through, and so I think I'd be interested to know like if they did do that on their own, just because they're all hanging out in Romania or whatever. They got 2 days to kill before Sansa's back up, so they she kind of does on her own. I think that would be interesting to find out if it is truly off the cuff like that. But I think it's hard for because the demands are so great and they're learning their lines and they're and they're jumping in and shooting, and then they got to learn a whole new scene and start that up. It's tough to pull off in that way.
You also, though, I think you want the Wizard of Oz to actually be a wizard. You know what I mean? You don't. The idea that it's just this guy from Kansas is not as interesting on some level, right? So, you want to create the mystique of your, of the show, and let people live within the world of the show. And whenever you're breaking that fourth wall and sort of saying, "Hey, we just shoot it like everything else," and I put on makeup, and I think that's something that is driven by more of a marketing need to engage people with your show, and less by us sort of saying from a content, from the story standpoint, I don't necessarily want people to see that stuff, because it kind of demystifies it. When Chris Nolan goes on and explains the ending of Inception, or David Chase talks about the last scene in The Sopranos, it's like, I'm interested from a technical standpoint and a fan, but I don't know, is that really what we should do, or shouldn't we just leave it hanging for people?
Also, I don't think that any of this stuff helps keep people watching the show, ultimately, because the people who watch this stuff are the super fans, the people who aren't going to leave the show anyway. So it's not like someone who's like on the fence about the show is going to be like, I was really convinced by that little skit they did during the hiatus that I'm coming back. I mean, the people who are going to seek that out and watch it are people that you've already got on board, I mean, look, the general audience has more access to the actors, the directors, the creators than they've ever had before, and some people are more active than others, on Twitter or what have you, and they might do things, sort of off the cuff for fun, which are fun, but I think that those are really directed at their personal following or the audience for that, that persona than anything else. And and then there's more sort of concerted efforts. Like we were asked by the White House Correspondents Association to do a skit, like a video for the correspondence dinner a few years back, and we thought, well, this would be a pretty cool thing to do, because we'll get to shoot in the White House and the Capitol, and the President of the United States will be sitting there watching it himself. But that was that was a 3-day shoot that cost a lot of money, that was scripted, in the midst of it, I'm like, why the fuck did I agree to this? Because I'm like shooting like 5 minutes of like as high quality stuff as we would shoot on the show, with the skeleton crew, traipsing around DC trying to make it as good as the show itself, and it was a major undertaking. When you've got getting your film gear into the White House is no joke. Let me just tell you, every piece has to be X-rayed. Dogs are sniffing it. People are standing around with machine guns. You're like dealing with some White House staffer who says, "I literally have 7 minutes to do this, and then I've got to go to the Situation Room." So anyway. But I don't think that any of this stuff gets people to stick around.
Yeah, the superfan comment, that is a good rebuttal to the executives asking for more content. That's certainly true.
There's also like different levels of how open actors are. So you give a video camera to Christian Brun, he'll run around in his underwear and shoot everything, including his underwear, and shoot everyone. But then he'll point the camera at another actor who's like, "Please do not intrude. This is my process," right? And they're very private about it.
Is that how they talk?
Yes, the ones with process, yes. For instance, a lot of media outlets and a lot of people have been very interested in going into Tatiana's makeup trailer and seeing her transformations. And she's very open in a lot of ways, but that is sacrosanct. That is not that transformation process. That's private,
right.
And she does not want anybody to see that piece of the process. Totally understand that, right?
Yeah, especially that does get to the it's too much point. How much do we have to give, right? Any question? Go ahead. You? Yeah.
Okay, making sure.
Yeah.
A lot of you're talking about with the supplemental material being a lot of marketing, obviously. How much control do you have over what marketing does? Or do you just kind of go, okay, made the show, done it, and then the marketing department takes it and does what they want to do with it?
That one.
For us, season 1, I mean, Fincher shot all of the key art himself. I came up with all of the copy. I write the blurbs that you see on Netflix personally for episode descriptions. We have a big discussion with the marketing people at the very beginning of the year where I walk them through the broad strokes of the season, thematically, what we're trying to do, what some of the things they might want to be thinking about. Those discussions are ongoing throughout the year. We take marketing really seriously, not just because it helps people be aware of the show, but we feel like every image we put up, every word we put out there, anything that has to do with House of Cards is a reflection of the show itself. So we want it to have the same standard that we're approaching the actual content with, and we're lucky to work with really open-minded and progressive marketing people who deal with our micromanagement.
For us, it's a bit of an ongoing conversation because at the beginning of both seasons, I would go in with the showrunner and we would pitch to a whole room of people at CBS, 20-some people who run, all the promo stuff and the web, all that kind of, all those things, and we'd pitch them the big ideas and the big themes and the stuff that we were dealing with. And then you talk about some stuff, these are the things we don't want to talk about because they're going to be spoilers or big, and that's kind of an ongoing thing. There were times last year at season, we would get an email with a link to a promo spot, and then watch and go, God, they're showing this one shot, and we know that's such an exciting part of the episode. So you email them and say, hey, we want to hold that back. Would you mind? And they're always really great about that because they don't want it. They don't want to spoil that kind of thing too. And we didn't have as much of a conversation about all the web stuff last season. We're having a lot more of that right now. As we're going into season 2 and the discussion about it, and a lot of times with press and publicity and things that we the same thing. Writing or at least taking a pass at the episode blurbs and the things that go out into TV Guide and that kind of stuff too, just to make sure that it's telling the story in the way that that we want to tell it too. But it's a partnership.
Graeme, are you writing the blurbs too? I mean, that's pretty hands-on, though.
Sometimes, usually, I'll certainly take a pass at them, but someone in the writers' room will write those blurbs. Yeah. And then I think it's kind of a conversation as well, where a lot of this marketing stuff we need to very carefully vet for spoilers because we're pretty sticky about that. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to things like key art, that's more network driven, and we're sort of invited to give our opinions.
Invited to tell them how much you like it.
And we have to do it twice because we have 2 networks, one in Canada, Space, and we have BBC America.
Right. Okay, we'll take one more and then we can go. Yeah.
A lot of you guys are all drama guys, which I think has a little more leeway.
Beau's pretty funny.
With
Fargo's fucking hilarious. What are you talking about?
But how do you think this applies to comedies? The idea of now that Netflix and Hulu and now these guys are kind of picking up more traditional.
Well, comedy's easier, I think. It's sort of the internet is the perfect thing for comedy, with Key and Peele or The Daily Show or any of these shows. It's like the viralness of those videos, the fact that you have something that's 2 minutes long that has a beginning, middle, and end, and that you can put out there and that draws people to your show. And, I think that's great. It's a lot harder.
Way harder to write, much easier to market.
Right, yeah. It's hard to do King Lear in 92 seconds, you know what I mean? To take people on that journey. But if the latest Valet Guy skit from, about the Neesons, that, sells itself. So we should all be making comedies, I think.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out for starters, but this group right here.